Hey, Molly. Molly loves my sweatshirt. Thank you. Accessibility is everyone's responsibility. I'll put the link in there, friend, where I ordered this. We love it from the Joys of Olive Foundation. So thumbs up to you, friend. So hi, everyone. Welcome to the next series in our Aiming for Access in less than 30 minutes. We are so lucky to have our AIM Center Project Director, Dr. Elizabeth Barker, who is here, and the topic is vetting accessibility on assessments. And she has a lot to share. So I'm going to stop talking now and lend it over to you, friend.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you. Thank you. I'm excited to be here. You all, it is my first presentation for CAST, and you all get to experience it. So I'm excited. As Kelly said, I am Elizabeth Barker, and I can first, there we go. I have to use my mouse. And I am the Senior Technical Assistant and Project Director for the AIM Center. With that, I want to point you to our home-based document. This is one for vetting accessibility on assessment. There is a QR code on the screen if you want to use that, or there is a link to bit.ly. So bit.ly bit.ly/AIM, AEM, on assessment, ASSESSMENT. That will take you to our home-based doc. It's got some great resources on there. I highly recommend it. So we have a lot to cover on vetting accessibility on assessments. And this is going to kind of start off broad. We're going to talk about the definition of assessment. We're going to then narrow down into the definition of a disability. We will narrow down into the definition of accommodations and accessibility, and then really get into those accessibility points for assessment. So let's get on the same page when we talk about assessment. This particular definition, which I will, in bad form, read out loud to you off the slide. I do feel like it's an important definition. I love this one. It comes from Assessment and Education, a book written by Terasawa, Gottwals, and Jackson in 2020. And what I really appreciated about this definition, it was created with a task force that met over 3 years that included assessment developers, classroom teachers, school and district level administrators, in-service and pre-service educators, as well as assessment experts. So it's a very well thought and carefully crafted definition. And I think it will just level us out on what I'm referring to when I talk about assessment. So it reads, assessment is the process of gathering information about student learning to inform education-related decisions. One becomes assessment literate by mastering basic principles of sound assessment practice, coming to believe strongly in their consistent, this is going to be an important word, high quality application in order to meet the diverse needs of all students. Love that, all students. And acting assertively based on those values. And again, I really appreciate the phrase, acting assertively based on those values, because that's what we need to do when it comes to access for our students. Traits of assessment understanding. This I find very important. As someone, my past life experience was being a researcher, using assessment, supporting accessibility on digital assessments. And one of the biggest things that we need to understand about assessments is the purpose. Understand the purpose of that assessment, why it was created, what that assessment is aligned to. If you're creating one in your classroom, really hone in on that purpose and consider how the results will be used. Who is seeing these results? Is it for your MTSS program? Is it for your IEP measurement goals? Is it for the state summative assessment? Is it going to be aggregated up to district and state level use? What are the results? How are they going to be used? An important aspect to assessments that sometimes gets missed. Also, learning targets to dictate that appropriate assessment. Use those learning targets to help you within the classroom create the assessment that you're truly wanting for your students. Valid results. This is an important feature for accessibility. Valid results comes from quality assessments, and we're going to talk about how to get those quality assessments when considering accessibility and accommodations. Communicate. If you can communicate the results to parents and students and others, that's going to help you understand the purpose and how these results will be used. Also, try and communicate with your partner at home. Try and communicate with your own children. Try and communicate it with a friend. Being able to communicate results helps us to understand what that assessment is truly looking for and will help you understand what accommodations and accessibility needs to happen. And then create assessments and purchase assessments and look at assessments that help to motivate students. I know all of you are probably thinking, oh my goodness, how can an assessment possibly motivate students? Well, let's try and push for that. We want students to aim for goals. We want students to see that they've achieved. And being able to create assessments that do that can be part of the process. They don't all have to be scary and unfun or not fun. So with that, let's start diving in to our access. And of course, I'm going to start out with universal design for learning, but I really love this as a framework to really consider our accessibility for our students when it comes to assessments. Of course, we just hit on that multiple means of engagement, really making those assessments motivating. This can help engage students. This can help students understand that they want to see what it is that they know. And doing that in multiple ways. Again, thinking about that purpose and how you can get there. Multiple means of representation. I like to simply bring this down to, can students enter into the content of that assessment? Can they get in there? Is it accessible? Can they enter in using their refreshable Braille device? Can they enter in with that keyboard navigation? Can they enter in using a switch? Can be condensed to a very simplified way to help us ensure that assessments are really considering accessibility. And then, of course, the third one is multiple means of action and expression. So for this one, and one that tends to get missed on assessments, is output. Can the student use their assistive technology, their software, to output their answers? So while they're in there, the next piece is, how are they outputting? And can they do it in multiple ways? All right, again, I said we were going to define that disability. And this is how I like to look at it. This is my definition of disability as a mismatch between a person and their environment. For me, this takes the onus off the person, off the student, and really helps us focus on what is it in the environment that's acting as a barrier. And accessibility is a correction of that mismatch. This is what we want our students to be successful. We want to see what it is that they know and can do. And in order to remove those barriers, we need a correction of that mismatch. All right. Accommodations. We cannot talk about assessments without talking about accommodations. And yes, there is the difference between accommodations and accessibility. So on the screen, there's a picture. I have a picture of it looks kind of like a university door and kind of walkway. And there's this big door frame, and the door is slightly ajar because one person has hit the automatic door opener on the side. The other person, who's a woman, has crutches and what looks to be a leg brace on her leg that's starting to walk through the doors. They're inside the building and they're walking out to the building. I selected this picture to be a representation of the difference between accommodations and accessibility. So accommodations, which is typically what we're always seeing. What accommodations does the assessment have? What accommodations can I give on this assessment? What is the accommodation policy for the state level assessments? And what we really want is, and what shows so lovely in this picture, is we want the house, we want the building to be built with accessibility. So what this picture shows with that automatic door opener and the doors being large enough for anybody, wide enough for anybody to enter through and into, This building was built with accessibility in mind. It was built for as many people as possible. And the accommodation in this picture are the crutches. She needs the crutches in order to walk through that door, but the door is being opened for her because it's accessible. So I really want you to hold that in your mind and really consider that when we are talking about accessibility. We're talking about, have things been built with accessibility in mind? Has the foundation, is the house being built with accessibility? And a lot of times we really want this to be done from the beginning. Sometimes that can be a challenge, especially if something's been built 40, 20 years ago, and then some retrofitting has to happen. But really consider accessibility as a foundation, and the accommodations are being able to be used appropriately. Okay. So we laid the foundation. We got our UDL. We got our definition of assessment. We got our definition of what a disability is. We got our definition of accommodations and accessibility. Y'all, it's a lot of information, and I could have talked about an hour on each one of those slides so far. And these next ones, I probably could have a webinar on one per day, but we are going to get through this. And we probably have about 20 minutes left. So where do we start? Oh my goodness, where do we start? We are going to start with POUR. And if you've listened to any cast or any AIM Center presentations, you've probably heard of POUR. But how can we use POUR to help us create our assessments in the classroom? How could you use POUR when you're vetting assessments that you may be purchasing or looking at in the next few years? So if you don't know, POUR stands for perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And where you'll most likely see this acronym is on the WCAG, or the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. It's how they break down the guidelines to consider accessibility for the web. And you'll also see this on a VPAT. A VPAT is a voluntary product accessibility template, or you may see an ACR, which is the validation of that VPAT. And this is something that you may ask from your assessment vendors if they have one and if they align to the VPAT. So POUR you will see in those two areas, and that is why I want to walk through this with you. So let's start with the first principle, okay? Perceivable. Perceivable materials present information in a flexible format for a variety of ways in which the learner can recognize information. You guys, this aligns so well with our multiple means of representation. Can they enter into the content? Is it accessible? Can they adjust the text size? Can they adjust the background changes? Are there alt tags, alternative text, for picture charts and graphs? And if you don't know what alternative texts are used for, it's typically for screen readers, which is different than text to speech. Screen reader is typically used for students who are blind and low vision that are using and needing that auditory feedback, or it's being sent to the refreshable braille display, and pictures, charts, and graphs need to be described. Are there video captions and audio descriptions if the assessment has video? And then is it offering sign language or other variations? Entering into that content, we want them to be able to customize displays for their needs, for the students' needs, and we want them to have that multiple means of media in order to get in there. So this is how we can start aligning those things of understanding our assessment. What's the purpose? Can they enter into that content, right? Is it perceivable? Are there multiple means of representation? Are we eliminating those barriers? Operable, that's our next one. Operable. Operable materials provide flexible navigation options for content and give multiple ways to control the interface. So I like to think of this one as, is it usable? So we can have the first one where we are aligning to various standards. What I want you to ask and consider is whether or not the alignment matches the usability. So how can you do this? What I recommend is that you ask for a demo. Ask for a demo, get practice items or test questions, ask them to see the interface and actually see a demo, or even with those practice questions that you may receive, try it out yourself. Go through the assessment and find out if it's usable. Also ask whether or not it was created with people with disabilities. There is a popular saying that I love, nothing for us without us, whether or not it has been tested or reviewed by people who use assistive technology. That usability piece can sometimes be missed, and it's a really important factor, especially when we think about assessments and that valid quality that we want in order for the barriers to be removed and so that they can participate and really show us what it is that they know and understand. So we want to consider whether or not it's usable. And if you are the one creating the assessment, ask your colleagues to test it out. Ask a student, hey, let me know what's wrong with this. Would you be willing to help me out with this? I need support. I want to make sure that students can really function through this assessment. It is something that I actually have done in the past myself for teachers and for professors to give information back on whether or not what they've created is usable. It's a very important piece. Is it operable? Okay, understandable. Here we go. Another layer. Okay, so we have entering in. Can they enter in? Is it usable, right? Can they respond? Can they actually get through the assessment without barriers? This piece is the content, the meat of the assessment. Understandable. Understandable materials have an intuitive, logical, and predictable way. Remember I said that consistency piece and that definition was becoming important? This will be important. To let learners focus more of their energy and attention to understanding the content. I mean, that's what we want, right? In order for students to show us what they know, they don't need to be messing around with how this functions or whether or not that the content is making sense. We want them to just kind of be able to focus on, hey, show me what it is that we know. So I can take my instruction to the next level, or we may need to dive deep into an area of opportunity, right? I mean, that's what we want. So consider the content within the assessment. Look at the directions, look at the questions, look at the answer options. You want to check for readability, okay? You want to see whether or not the assessment has considered that readability level is important. You want to check for figurative language, okay? If it's not assessing figurative language, which it may be, depending on the assessment, right? Go back to that purpose. Depending on the assessment, you may be assessing figurative language. If not, we need to remove it. It is a big barrier for many students at figurative language. You want to look for audio and visual and physical bias. What do I mean by that? Content that relies on those features for a student to answer. One example that I can think of off the top of my head, and this was something that I learned from working in assessment. We had a test question come in from a lovely author. It was around poetry. We were aligning to a poetry standard, and it was talking about apples and oranges and the different colors and doing a comparison. And students really needed to understand that there were red apples, green apples, visual bias. We don't want them to have to rely on color in order to answer the question. Okay, the same can happen with auditory. Do they have to understand a sound in order to answer the question? If so, what can we do to put in supports to let them enter into that content in order to respond and give us what it is that they know and understand? Consistency. Here's the big consistency piece. While we want the variety, we want the different questions, we want them to enter in, when it comes to how the assessment is created, we want consistency, because what we don't want is for students to have to figure things out as they go. So an example of this are alternative text. So one thing that we found in assessment is that alternative text can be written very differently depending on who's writing them. So an important piece that we want to consider with assessments is ensuring that students are having a consistent experience. It helps AT users. It helps students that are using assistive technology to come up against something and know what to expect. You can still have variety while having consistency. Okay, and then our last one, robust. Is it robust? Robust materials work well with both current and future technologies, web-based browsers, reading systems. This includes compatibility with assistive technology. While we've been talking about that throughout, I really want to make this clear that robust is a big challenge, and it comes in honestly. It is hard to be compatible with every single assistive technology and software out there. So this is where you need to do some homework when you're vetting assessments. You want to look for an accessibility statement first and foremost on that assessment's website. This shows you that they are prioritizing accessibility, which means they are considering AT. The next thing you want to do is check for their compatibility. Who have they worked with? Who have they said, you know what, this works great on our system? Meaning we are compatible with JAWS on Firefox. That could be their compatibility. Or we are compatible with VoiceOver on Safari. Or we are only compatible with UEB Braille. Or we are only compatible with Nemeth Braille. Or hey, maybe you'll get one that's compatible with both. But these are things you want to check as you're vetting assessments because it is a real challenge to really kind of get the robustness that we need right now. I'm hoping that AI kind of supports us on this one going forward. But it is a challenge, and it's good to be aware of what it is to look for and really ask those questions up front because you want it to match what you are using in your classroom. One of the big things with this, with accessibility and assessment is we know we do not want to try something new with a student on an assessment, right? We don't want to try that text-to-speech feature on the assessment. We really want to go forward that they've been using it in the classroom all the time. So really check those devices. And lastly here, copyright, ensure that there's copyright that is favorable towards accessibility, and then secure testing browsers. We sometimes forget about these. These are part of the assessment that if it's in a high stakes scenario where the students are unable to reach out towards the internet. Well, what can happen with the secure testing browser is it can shut the AT down in a certain way. So I'll give you an example of what this means. Students with low vision may need to use color contrast. And what they need to do, some students get fatigued throughout the assessments and they'll change the color contrast several times. And that's to help so they don't fatigue out with their eyes. That is an example of where a secure testing browser may not allow that. And so that's where it goes back to that usability piece and really thinking and vetting about this robustness on how accessibility fits into all those pieces of an assessment. So with that, lots of information. Oh my goodness, like I said, we could have covered this for days, but we have 5 minutes left and I want to get to some questions if possible. So let me see. Oh, goodness. Kelly, do you see any questions? I'm struggling to find the comments, the chat.
Hi, friend. So there was a question in the Q&A about if CAST and the AIM Center had resources about creating alt text. And I did drop a link in there, but if you wanted to expand more on that, there you go.
Yes, absolutely. Great question. I'm so excited you asked that. Okay, so yes, the AIM Center has a lovely piece. I also dropped one in on the home base document. That's something that NWEA, an assessment organization, worked with the National Center of Accessible Media in 2021, and 14 teachers from the School for the Blind and Deaf and Hard of Hearing that created alt text examples for assessments particularly, because it can be a challenge. They're much different than writing ones for curriculum or for the web. That is on the home-based document. Please help yourselves. Both are great resources.
Thank you, Liz. We have another question.
Okay.
When do you think the ACT and SAT will get on board and other high stakes tests?
Oh, that's a great question. And, you know, I think that some of them have done a wonderful job with accommodations, but the accessibility piece is a hard nut to crack. And so I do know that there are lots of people trying to work hard at making this happen. And sometimes patience is needed because a lot of assessments, excuse me, a lot of AAA words, a lot of assessments have been around for years, and platforms need to retrofit, and that takes time. So I'm hopeful, but I hear you.
Liz, are you able to see the chat?
I am, but Kelly, it's really helpful for me if you see any other questions coming up.
Someone's asking where they can access the home-based document, and I'm happy to put that back in the chat.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay. Any other questions? Oh, we are recording, so. And thank you, Kelly, for putting that in. And it looks like my camera's getting fuzzy. All right, well, with that, we will go. Thank you all. And our next presentation will be on April 18th, and you will have Mia Lodato, who is our new director of the Sites Center. So excited to have her and have her present for you. And also, we don't want to forget our UDL Con International is coming up July 30th through the 31st in Sacramento, sunny Sacramento. And you can also stay connected with us and contact us via Twitter at cast_UDL, on Facebook at castudl. And our email for the AIM Center is aem@cast.org. And you can also check out our website at aem.cast.org. So thank you all so much for being here. I appreciated your time, and hopefully we'll see you in a couple weeks.